Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So today the message is from Terumah, and I entitled it, Can a Willing Heart Be Developed? Last week in Parashat Meshpatim, we read that Moses ascended the mountain of God, Mount Sinai, and he would remain there for 40 days and 40 nights. Then the next thing we read, whether it happened chronologically or not, God asked Moshe to tell the Israelites to take gifts to him from every person who has a willing heart. Does a person naturally have a willing heart? Can we develop a willing heart? We know our first instinct is to have an unwilling heart. We're rebellious. Last week, Mauricio Quintero explained the expression in Exodus 24:7. Kol asher daber Adonai na'aseh v'nishma. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do and obey or listen. In other words, first we do and then we listen. This goes against our nature. Our nature dictates that we have to think very carefully about what we do before we do it. Ironically, I've spent most of my life first doing and then thinking about it. Maybe that is our nature. So my innate method was correct according to the Torah, but what I was choosing to do was taking me down the wrong path. See, I wasn't taught the Torah in my early years. In the book of Exodus, God is directing Israel onto the right path, diverting the Israelites' attention away from the practices of the false gods of Egypt to his ways. When we learn, as our ancestors were taught, to do what God is directing us, even if we question it, we will increasingly grow to trust him, and we will be blessed. This is a process whereby little by little, over time, by witnessing how wise his directives are, hopefully, our desire to listen to him, to obey him, becomes second nature to us. That's the lesson about giving or contributing, which is terumah. We begin through simple obedience, where we control our ruminating over it. We do it, we give simply because God says to. When I turned my life over to God in my early 40s, I was taught two principles. The first, be available. Say yes when asked to serve. And the second is always tithe. This is how to love God with all our heart, our soul, and our resources, which will result in loving our neighbor, as Yeshua told us when he summed up the 10 Commandments. At that time, I had very little money. I was deep in debt, was earning a very low income in a new job. I was a single mother raising 2 children. At the end of the month, I looked at my checking account and wondered, how am I going to be able to tithe and also pay my rent? So I began to bargain with God. Lord, you know I don't have enough to give you this month. I have all these bills to pay. Please, can it wait till next month? Then I remembered the verses that I was shown in Malachi 3:10-11. Do not rob me. Bring the full tithe into the storehouse, and let there be food in my house. In this, put me to the test, said the Lord of hosts. I will surely open the floodgates of heaven for you and pour out for you such overflowing blessings, said the Lord of hosts. So I told God, okay, I'm taking you at your word. I'm testing you, as you said. What chutzpah. I wrote out the check for my tithe, and just when the rent came due, a bonus came through at work that covered all my expenses for that month. And so many similar incidents have happened over the years to erase my doubt. Now, don't misunderstand me. We don't give because we're going to receive something in return. We give out of obedience and gratitude to God for how much he has blessed us. And as I watch God work in my life, my desire to give and to serve him grows. And my first instinct is to want to give. I was developing a willing heart. That outpouring of generosity in my heart, to be honest, is not natural for me. But the more I give and the more I see I receive in every aspect of my being, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, the more I want to give. And it's not only about giving financially, it includes the giving of our time and our gifts to serve God and each other. That's how we first do, and then we listen. In Terumah, we've seen that God is very specific about what gifts the Israelites would take to him. From the most precious stones and metals, gold, silver, and copper, to the most basic materials such as wood and goat's hair. These would be used to build the Mishkan in the desert, both inside and out. Each item had a purpose and were obtained from what the people had already received as parting gifts from the Egyptians when they left. Nothing comes for free, not even those supposed gifts. Those items were payments to the Hebrews for having endured the many tortuous years of hard labor. And there was a purpose even in that. The building of the Mishkan was not for God. Did he need a house to dwell in? Isaiah tells us in chapter 66, this is what God said, heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Where could you build a house for me? What place could serve as my abode? All this was made by my hand, and thus it all came into being, declares God. The Israelites had been entranced by the magnificent temples in Egypt, and now with the Mishkan, God would slowly wean them away by shifting their paradigms, as he's doing with us. Isaiah continues, yet to such a one do I look, to the poor and contrite spirit, who is concerned about my word. Those who truly love God and his word are willing to learn to give out of humility and a deep sense of gratitude, while those filled with the pride of their accomplishments give only to feed their own egos. Eventually, we all get humbled. God knows what the heart of man needs, and he supplies it. He described to Moshe all the articles that were needed to build the Mishkan. He began with the ark, into which the most precious gift to humanity would be placed. It says, deposit into the ark the tablets of the covenant which I will give you. Now, God had already spoken to the millions of people at the base of Mount Sinai, but now he would engrave his covenant, his pact with us, in stone. And these tablets would be placed in the ark, covered with the most precious commodity, gold. Gold never loses its value. It doesn't tarnish or corrode. Its shine inspires all those who look upon it. Upon the ark were placed two cherubim, two cherubs, angelic beings, later again referred to in Ezekiel in chapter 10 and Revelation chapter 4. God was bringing aspects of heaven down to earth to protect his most precious gift to humanity. It was in this tabernacle that God would meet with Moses to tell him all that he would command the Israelites. What other nation has ever had such an experience? What other nation was given such an honor and yet had to carry such responsibility? It was with this ark that the army of Israel, that first army of Israel, would move forward into victory over their enemies. It was not their strength alone that prevailed, but God's. And this is what we need to remember today when this modern day Israel Defense Force, the IDF, is battling the most brutal of enemies. The ark would be placed in an area called the Holy of Holies, HaKodesh HaKadoshim, Holy or kadosh means to be separate, something that God would continually emphasize. He separated us from the Egyptians by placing us in Goshen until the time we left Egypt, when we were completely separated from them and their gods. We may have physically left, but it would take an entire generation dying out in the desert to fully leave the gods of Egypt behind. He separated the place where Moses would meet him, distinguishing it from the grandiose temples of Egypt. Those were gorgeous on the outside. They were attracting all to come and worship the gods of death within. But the Mishkan, which was ugly on the outside, attracted no one except those whom God had called to come and worship the God of life within. The Hebrews would go through the process of being separated through their clothes, their eating habits, and their service to God, but most importantly, through a moral code of ethics and justice placed within that ark of gold. Although Moses was shown a heavenly pattern for the design of his tabernacle, there was freedom in how it would be expressed materially. God gives us room to create within the boundaries that He sets up for us in our lives. He created the pattern, but allows us to work freely within it, using the materials that He provides for us, given to us as gifts in payment for the work that we do and the hardships that we have experienced. This is what we see with all the things that were given to us to build the Mishkan. In Terumah, Moshe was beginning the building of the sanctuary, the Mishkan, where God would dwell among His people. God dwelled among the Israelites then, and He is dwelling amongst His people now, everywhere, to this very day. You know, here in Montreal, we have been building this sanctuary that we called Kehilat Shear Yashuv. And it began with a physical location back in 1993, but has now evolved into a virtual one. For those of us who have been here from the beginning, we know the trials and the struggles we have been through. Thousands of people have passed through our doors, and many have tried to destroy us because we didn't fit into their religious paradigms, into their boxes. As a matter of fact, they even prophesied that within 3 months, our doors would close. This happened not once, but several times. And yet here we remain. And although our beloved Rabbi has physically left us, his teachings and his spirit are still with us. And he took them directly from the Torah. You know, God works in a spiritual way to build practical things. Our lives have to deal with practical matters that have spiritual applications. It is our responsibility to take the physical first fruits of whatever we have received to the place where we are fed spiritually. We may want to bargain with God or give Him excuses like, God, I don't earn enough. Oh, everything is way too expensive. Or after I pay all my bills, I have very little left for myself. We may say, I work too hard. I have a family to take care of. I have no time left to serve God. See, not only financially, but also our time. But are we trusting in ourselves instead of our God? Are we developing a willing heart? Or are we refusing to trust the God who provides everything for us? May we learn to develop a willing heart. May we do first and then listen. Shabbat Shalom.